Good morning, church. Welcome to worship this morning. Glad you're here. Glad it's not raining. Glad that we can be the church as we come together and worship our God Most High. And I want to thank you for being here. Kent's preaching on King David today, and I got to thinking about that. I wrote a song that mentions King David in it, and it's kind of fun. So if you guys go to your drive-in lyrics, drive-in resources on rosendalcc.com, you'll find the lyrics page there. Should be on there. The song's called Come On and Praise Him. We do not have a radio broadcast going today. The weather in the area is kind of messing with that, so might have to crack your windows a little bit. And sing so loud I can hear you. That'd be great. More importantly, sing so loud the Lord hears you. This is not a time to be silent. This is not a time to sit still. This is not a place to be hidden. Or shine your light like a city on a hill. Come on and praise Him. Let your voices sing. Come on and praise Him. And celebrate the King. Come on and praise Him. Do not be ashamed, come on and praise Him. Praise His holy name. The King David danced and shed his clothes in a wild celebration of the Lord. As you can imagine, his wife was upset. The king said, honey, you ain't seen nothing yet. Come on and praise Him. Let your voice sing, come on and praise Him. And celebrate the King, come on and praise Him. Do not be ashamed, come on and praise Him. Praise His holy name. Now you may hold tight to your dignity and say this crazy praising is not for me, but come into the presence of the Lord, and let the thoughts about yourself go out the door. Come on and praise Him. Let your voices sing. Come on and praise Him. Celebrate the King. Come on and praise Him. Do not be ashamed. Come on and praise Him. Praise His holy name. Come on and praise Him. Let your voices sing, come on and praise Him. Oh, celebrate the King, come on and praise Him. Do not be ashamed, come on and praise Him. Praise His holy name. Amen. Praise His name this morning. With a hawk, here we go. Couple of announcements. First of all, I did announce we don't have the radio today, so crack your windows and listen to that. We had plans to next Sunday go back inside the building. The board met on this week, and we are going to hold off on that. We're going to meet outside until further notice. So one thing that may change is next week, bring a lawn chair with you. And if we can, we're going to meet on the east side of the building and set up things over there. And everyone ought to be in lawn chairs. We're going to have to pay attention to our spacing and social distancing, and if you're not feeling well, join us on the live stream, and just be mindful of those things. But I think it'd be great to sit out amongst God's creation and praise Him and hear each other praising Him, and just have fellowship that way. If it's inclement weather, we'll move to our cars and stuff over here, and we'll set it up so we can do it either way. But next week, bring lawn chairs when you come to worship at Rosedale Christian Church. That'll be fun. The next thing is dealing with camp. It's our responsibility on June 20th to go over and mow the camp. And so if you want to contact me, if you can help, that'd be great. And just let me know that you could be there on the 20th, and I'll give you times and everything for that. But even though we're not meeting over there at camp, we don't want it to be a jungle when we get back to it. And other churches are going over there and mowing it. We appreciate that. So anybody that can take their mow over there on the June 20th, that'd be great. And so I'll turn it over to Gary for communion devotion. filming an episode of Cars here. The guy horns and honking and everything in response. So, there you go. Get up here. Closer. Is that better? Yeah. All right. Our devotion this morning is going to be from John chapter 10. We studied that in men's Bible study this morning, and it struck me. It's the chapter where Jesus talks about himself being the good shepherd. Now, he's the good shepherd, and we are his sheep. And we're in his fold, and he protects us, and we hear his voice. And he is the gate. No one enters the fold except through him. The part about that got me thinking is the paragraph that led into our study. The author of the study was pointing out the nature of sheep. Now, we live in an agrarian community, but there's hardly any of us that have any experience with sheep whatsoever. We really know nothing about them. We don't raise them anymore. But they also pointed out the fact that sheep are totally defenseless. They have no natural means of defense. In fact, they're rather stupid. It's kind of an insult to be called a sheep, because they can be standing in the presence of food and water, and they won't go to it unless their shepherd leads them to it. I want you to think about that analogy for a little bit. Jesus calls us sheep. Should be a little humbling. But he does it as an endearing term. And why does he do that? Why is that so? Because we're defenseless. Now, we don't see ourselves that way. We take great pride in defending ourselves, defending our property. We have Second Amendment rights to carry. We will protect ourselves and our family at all costs. We have great pride in our military, protecting our country. That's all great, but we're defenseless. We're not for our shepherd. Have you ever thought about that? You see, the scene that I want you to picture is the fact that one day we will stand before God, all creation will, and we will be totally defenseless. The only one there to defend us will be our shepherd, if he's your shepherd. And that's what Jesus is saying. He is the good shepherd. He will defend his sheep. The wolf and the thief, they come to kill, steal, and destroy. And the wolf and the thief, they will be there that day in judgment. But our shepherd will defend us. That's what we remember at communion. Jesus was our shepherd. He came and he gave his life for his sheep so he could defend them. If that doesn't make you appreciate this act of communion this morning, I don't know what will. Because that's what we're remembering. So, if you would want to take with me this morning, take this bread which represents his broken body as it was beaten and bruised and tortured for you. I'm trying to figure it out. And take the cup which represents his spilled blood. Now, if you'll pray with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for the gift of your Son. Lord, you sent him in the world to be our shepherd, something we dearly needed. And Lord, we come here this morning to worship you and to declare our praise to you. Lord, and to gather as a member of the church. Lord, your bride, the one you're coming back for someday. Lord, as we take this and remember the sacrifice and the love that you have for us, and may it carry us through the coming week before we meet again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
In the darkness we were in, without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running, There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cross, a cradle in the dirt. We praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side. Knowing this was our salvation, Jesus for our sake did die. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. And the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, as the soul was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born, then the Spirit lit the flame. And now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, it shall not fade. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Amen. He resurrected us. And praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Oh, praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings. You were the Word at the beginning, one with God the Lord Most High. The hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is, what a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus Christ our King. What a beautiful name it is, nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus. greater love is greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. A wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. They'll come before you. You silence the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. Before you are raised to life again. You have no rival, you have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. Father, we gather today in your name. The name of Jesus Christ. The name that is above all names. And God, we bow down low and cry, holy, holy, holy. And God, in your providence and in your plan, you lift us back up and call us children. Forgiven, redeemed, released to live in freedom and in truth. To be guided by your word and by your spirit. God, we gather in your name today and we cry, holy, holy, holy. Lord God Almighty. Amen.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're glad that you're here this morning, and if you're visiting with us also on Facebook Live online, we're grateful that you're here this morning. And we just want to remind all of you and thank you for continuing to give and support to the ministry of the church here at Rosendale. And we do want to remind you that you can still give and participate in offerings, and we have an Easy Tithe set up on our website that you can go there and give online, or you can always bring your donation to the church here and put it under Nicole's door, or you can mail in your donation. But we appreciate you continuing to remember the church and the ministry that is going on here. So, we've been involved in a series the last few weeks called King of My Heart, and we have been looking at the different kings of Israel and their relationship with God, as far as him either being the king of their heart or not being their king of their heart. And we have learned the first king of Israel was Saul, who was not a very good king at all. In fact, he had no heart for God. He was faithless. He was disobedient. He rejected and rebelled the things of God. And then we looked at last week, the third king of Israel was Solomon, David's son, to Bathsheba. And that he started out really well and did a lot of good things. And he was so wise and so godly in his kingdom, but there was that one vice, that one sin that drew him away from the Lord, and he began to spiral downhill, and even his kingdom, which was a kingdom of peace, actually began to unravel. And after Solomon's kingdom, that king with a divided heart left behind him a divided kingdom. And that we can tell from our sin and our rebellion against God that there are consequences for that. So today we're going to look at the bright spot of the kingdom of Israel, and that is the King David. And many of you know his story. You're probably more familiar with David than you are the other two kings and all the rest of the kings of the Bible. But David was told that he was a man after God's own heart. And we read from 1 Samuel 13, verse 14, and this is Samuel talking to Saul. Saul had been disobedient to God, and so Samuel is telling him, basically, your kingdom has been taken from you. You're no longer going to be king. He was for a while, but eventually his kingdom would be handed over to David. This is what it says. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Of course, we know that king to be David. David's the only one in the Bible that is described as a man after God's own heart. Now, that doesn't mean that there are other people, other men and women of the Bible that had heart for God, but David has this unique description of himself by God, because he was a man after God's own heart. Does that mean that David was better than the other kings? No, not necessarily. Did he have an advantage being a king for God? Not necessarily either. I think all the other kings had the same opportunity to be faithful to God, to obey him, to do the things that God wanted them to do. But David's heart was just right for the time that God would bring him into the kingdom. And you know and I know that our hearts are an important part of our life. They determine a lot of our choices, our decisions. They determine a lot of our attitude and our spirit, and just the way that we conduct our lives comes from our hearts. And either we can have a heart for God like David did, or we can have not a heart for God like Saul did in the comparison when it comes to that. So this morning I just want to kind of just a very brief overview of David's life, because there's so much of his life in the Bible, in 1 Kings and Chronicles and other places of the Bible that talk about this great king of Israel. And I just want to share with you four things that made David a man after God's own heart. What was it that set him apart from King Saul and even his son Solomon, who would reign after him? The first thing about David that we realize was David had a calling of God on his life, a special calling of God on his life. And when God called him, it wasn't expected. It wasn't the kind of calling that you would expect a person to have as the next king, because God had called David to be the next king of Israel while Saul was still king. And so David was pretty young. In fact, he was around 17, 18 years old. He was very young. And at the time of his calling, David was taking care of sheep. Gary talked about our good shepherd and how he takes care of us when we're defenseless and we're like sheep. But David was actually in this situation where he was the youngest of several brothers, and he was the one responsible to be out there with the sheep, the smelly, dirty sheep that need a lot of care, and they have to have a lot of the shepherd has to be very responsible for them. And so David is out there among the sheep, just in a humble, lowly situation and position in life. So the prophet Samuel goes to David's house. His father's name is Jesse, and Jesse has all his sons there, all older than David. And Samuel goes into the house, and Samuel was pretty sure of himself that God would choose the firstborn son, because he was taller and stronger, and he was the older child. And Samuel comes into the house and says, surely the Lord has anointed this one. Surely God has chosen this one. And whenever we go by man's expectations or man's standards, we're probably not going to get it right. And that was not right. Samuel did not know who God was going to anoint. He just obeyed God and went to his house. Well, he takes all the sons through the line, and Samuel says, no, the Lord hasn't chosen this one. He didn't choose this one. He hasn't called this one. And finally Samuel asks, do you have any more sons left? And Jesse said, yes, there's one out taking care of the sheep, and his name is David. And Samuel tells him, this is the man. This is the young man that's going to be the next king of Israel. You see, when Samuel goes to Jesse in David's house, God told Samuel, I have one qualification when we're looking for the next king, and it doesn't have anything to do with his appearance, his abilities, or his talents. It has everything to do with his heart, because God told Samuel, don't look at his appearance or his physical life, because God sees differently than man sees. We know this from the Bible. His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. Because man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And so when God called David to be the king, David's heart was already in a disposition to give himself to God, to be faithful and loyal to the things of God. God had called him to do that because in his life, he was already being prepared. God was getting him ready, not just to be a king, and I think this is important, but to be a shepherd of Israel. I think God wasn't necessarily looking for a political ruler. He was looking for a spiritual ruler, and that would be in the life of David. So God called David for God's purposes. Remember that when God calls us, it's not necessarily for us. It's for God, because it gives glory to God that He would call us to be the people of God. And God calls people that are, in 1 Corinthians 1, it talks about how God calls people that are not many, they're not very wise. They're not noble. They're not strong. He doesn't call us according to the flesh. He calls us according to our heart and to the Spirit of God. And He calls each and every one of us that are here today to a special calling, to a special mission or a project or some task that God has for all of us. And He's not looking on the outside of your life. He's looking on the inside. Your attitude, your willingness to be humble and to obey and to be faithful. Those are the things, the attitudes of the heart. So the next thing that we see about David's heart, so the first is his calling. The second was his character. Okay? David's character. So when God calls David a man after his own heart here in 1 Samuel 13, he's saying about David, David is a man of character. He's a man of honesty. He's a man of faithfulness. He's a man of obedience. He's a man after my own heart. He's a man of righteousness and holiness. He cares about the things of God. He loves the things of God, and he hates the things that God hates. He is a man of character. And that's one of the reasons that God called him, because he was already in position to be the person of God, to do the things that were right. And there were several things in David's life, as by way of illustration here this morning, that David showed that he was a man of character. The first one is when he was told by his father Jesse to go into the battle to where Saul and the army of Israel was at against Goliath and the Philistines. You guys know the story. I know you know it. But David, when he comes into camp, he's bringing his brother's food. When he comes into the camp, he hears this giant of a man taunting and mocking the God of Israel. And David's wondering, what's going on? This is not right. And he was convicted by that, and he saw that something was happening for the name against the name of his God. And so you know the story. David goes to Saul, and he wants to fight him because that was Goliath's challenge. Send a man to me to fight with me. And David said, I'll take on that challenge. Remember, he's in his late teens when this happens. But David did that not because he was some great warrior, because actually Saul told him, you can't fight this guy. You're young. He's an expert warrior. He's experienced in battle. And so he's telling David, you can't do that. David puts on his armor, and that doesn't work. And so David grabs, the few stones, and he goes to battle. And the Bible actually says in 1 Samuel 17 that he rushes toward the giant. He doesn't cower back. He doesn't shrink back, as Hebrews tells us. He actually moves forward to the enemy. He didn't do that because he was some strong, powerful shepherd. He did that because he was a man of character. He was a man of faith, and he wanted to do the right thing. And that's the way David lived all of his life. And we'll get to his faults and his sins here in a minute. But overall, David was a man of character who cared about doing the right things in any and every situation that he found himself. Toward the end of David's life, David wanted to build a temple for God. The Ark of the Covenant which is where they believed God dwelt, between the cherubim, didn't have a place to dwell, a holy place, a sacred place. So David wanted to build a temple for God. And it was David's desire to do that. It was something that was in his heart to do. And God told him, David, it is good that was in your heart to build me a temple, but you will not be the one to do that. It's going to be your son Solomon. You are a man of war. You have shed much blood in your kingdom. And because of that, I'm going to have your son Solomon, who is a man of peace, who is a king of peace, actually build a temple for me. But David began the process of collecting the funds and all the materials and even, putting the design together, the architecture design of the temple together. So when Solomon was of age and when he became king, David would just hand all of this over to him. He had done all the preliminary work, all of the planning, which is a lot of work in getting something ready. David was a man after God's own heart. He was a man of character. He listened to God, even though God told him no. That's not my plan for you. It's good that it was in your heart to do that, but I have another plan and situation. So David did in that situation what he could do and to prepare for his son Solomon to build the temple. So David was a man of character. Character is a person that cares about doing the right things no matter what situation and no matter who they're with. And that's hard sometimes today because it's challenging to do the right things. But it's always right to do the right things. And it takes a person of character to do that, a person of courage like David was. So David was called by God for his purpose, for God's purpose. He was a man of character. He was a man after God's own heart. And that's very important for us to understand. And he was also a man that had a conscience for God. He had a conscience for the things of God, for the awareness of God. I think this is what motivated David and what kept David strong throughout his kingdom and throughout the reign of his kingdom, was that he was constantly, continually aware of God's presence in his life. He just knew that God was there all of the time. And we're challenged with that today, I think, in our times, because our society and most people in most places of the world are more me or self-conscious than God-conscious. And it takes away the opportunity for us to see and understand and believe that God is with us wherever we go, whatever we're doing in life. And I think that's one of the things that helped David get through the things that he did. That Psalms, most of the Psalms, about 80%, 75 to 80% of the Psalms were written by David. When you read the Psalms, you can tell that David knows God. He has an intimate, special fellowship, relationship with the God of the universe. And many of his Psalms run the gamut of emotions and circumstances in his life. Sometimes David is angry. Sometimes David is fearful. Sometimes David calls down vengeance on asks God to get vengeance on his enemies. Sometimes David is very, very humble before God. Other times he's praising the Lord. If you read through the Psalms, you'll see all of these different emotions and situations that David finds himself. And you know what? He knew that at any time, in any situation, wherever he was at in life, he knew he could go to God and talk to him about those things. And it didn't matter how he felt or what he was going through. He was going to talk to God about it. I read a devotion this week that asked the question, just imagine that you were the last person in the universe. You were the last person on earth. If that were the case, have you ever thought about that ever could happen, or that you would be in a situation where you'd be the last person? The devotion said, if that were the case, our every thought would be like this: God and I, God and I. Because you knew that it was just you and God on the planet, in the universe. But you know what? That God's presence is as much with you right now, and you can be as close to him right now as if you were the only person in the universe. And I think that's what David experienced in his life. There were a lot of people around in Jerusalem, in the kingdom. There were a lot of enemy nations that were battling against David and all the things that he had to go through. But he believed God was so close, so near to him, that he could talk to him anytime. He believed in his omnipresence, which means God is everywhere at once. David asked in Psalm 139, where can I go from your presence? Where can I flee from your spirit? I can, no matter where I go in this world, God, you're going to be there. How much would that change and encourage our life if we realize that, no matter where we were in life, that we are aware of God's presence? That we can say today, God and I. James tells us to draw near to God because he will draw near to you. God is that close with us today. And I believe that's why David he was a man after God's own heart, because he longed for being in communion and fellowship and relationship with God. So David had a calling. There was a character in his life. He had a consciousness. He had awareness of God's presence in his life. And last of all, this morning, which is very important for us. So he had calling, okay? He had a character, and he had a consciousness of God, and he also had confession. David confessed. Now, we know that David messed up, and most of the time we talk about David, that's usually what we talk about, unfortunately, because there were so many good things in David's life. There were bright spots in his life as a godly king. But David did mess up. He committed adultery with Bathsheba. He had her husband put in the fiercest part of the battle so he would be killed. Now, David didn't kill him directly, but he gave orders for him to be in battle so he would be killed. David did some other wrong things in his life. But when a person, a man or a woman after God's own heart messes up, and we all will at times, probably the best response for us is to own up to those things and to confess and to repent. And that's what David did. When he did that, when he realized, when Nathan the prophet came to David and told him that he was the man that did these things, you remember the story that Nathan gave to David. And David was so angry, and he told Nathan that man needed to die. And Nathan points out, you're the man. You're the man that has committed these offenses. David immediately confessed and acknowledged his own sin. And from that, today, we have one of probably the most beautiful expressions of confession and repentance in the Bible. And that's from Psalm 51. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of these verses. I just want to read a few of those to you this morning. And this is David after he had committed these sins. He says, have mercy upon me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to the multitude of your tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions. David says, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. I acknowledge my transgression, and my sin is always before me. Against you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight, that you may be found just when you speak and blameless when you judge. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. So David knew he was a sinner, and it didn't start with Bathsheba and Uriah. It actually started when he was conceived in the womb. That David had taken on the sin nature of his parents. That's what happens. We pass it down to the next generation, and all of us take on that nature of sin. David realized that. He says, behold, you desire truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden part you will make known to me wisdom. David cries out, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Going down to verse 10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. And then David says, deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed, O God, the God of my salvation, and my tongue shall sing aloud of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall show forth your praise. For you do not desire sacrifice, or else I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offerings. So David is crying out to God. He's confessing. He is acknowledging his sin. He knows he doesn't deserve to live. He's at the mercy of God, because he knows that his sin is worth God judging him for all of eternity. And yet David finds out that God is willing to forgive. He's willing to heal us from our sin. He's willing to give us a new start in life. When a person that's a Christian, a man or woman after God's own heart that loves Christ, messes up, and we all fall short of his glory at times, the thing to do is come before the mercy and the forgiveness of God and ask him to forgive us and heal us and give us a new beginning, a new start. David did that, and to me, that's what made David a man after God's own heart. It wasn't just all the good things that he accomplished in his kingdom and how he won every battle that he ever faced against his enemies, but that he longed for the things of God. And when he didn't quite attain to those things, he was willing to tell God that he had fallen, that he had sinned, and that God would restore him. And I hope that you know, no matter where you're at in life, no matter what you're going through, because our past has a way of eating at us and making us feel guilty and shameful, but there is forgiveness and healing when we come before God, when we repent of him, when we confess our sins. There's new life that can happen. I tell you, as you know, that it's such a burden that's lifted when you do that. And because of David's, when we go through a series of pain or suffering or difficult times, out of that can come some of the best times of ministry, some of the best words, maybe you'll say, some of the, in the music industry, some of the best songs that we have today are those artists or their families going through difficult times. And they share these songs, and they're so profound and so meaningful because it's coming out of a time of hurt, of suffering, of pain and agony in their spiritual life. So I know that confession and repentance aren't easy. They're not easy for us to do because we like to think that we've got everything together and it's real hard for us to humble ourselves. But that's where we're asking the Holy Spirit to convict us of the things of God and make us have a heart like David did. A heart that was willing to respond to the call of God in his life, and he was at a young age. And he wasn't doing anything elaborate or great. He was taking care of sheep. That's the thing about God. He'll meet you where you're at. I think being a man or woman after God's own heart is also being a person of character, no matter who we're with or what we're doing. And David had that. It's having a God consciousness on a continual basis, being in his word, listening to his spirit, worshiping him, even when things are difficult. And it's confessing and owning up to the things that we've done that are wrong before God. And he begins to do a work in your heart, in your life, that helps you grow and mature. I know that through this time, through this season that we're going through this pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, is a growing time for us. I think we'll come out differently than we were before, obviously. There's things that God is trying to teach us. And for each one of us, it might be something different. But I hope in the end of it, that we'll all come out being more stronger in our hearts for God. That we'll be men and women that we will pursue after God's own heart. It doesn't just happen. It takes work and effort to do that in our lives. And I love David's story. I love his life, not because it was perfect, but because David was real with God. And he faced difficulties and struggles, but his heart continued to get bigger for the things of God and holiness and righteousness and peace. And I pray that for us today. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for your love and grace in our lives, and thank you for the opportunity that we have to come and worship you today. And Father, I pray that you accept our worship, that you hear our praises, and you hear the words and the songs. And God, we remember that what you did for us on the cross through your Son Jesus. And Father, continue to work in our lives and change us, make us new, create in us, God, a clean heart, and renew a steadfast spirit within us today. God, we're thankful that you haven't given up on us, that you still seek and save the lost, and you sanctify us by your truth. God, we love you this morning, and help us just to have a heart for you each and every day. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Death could not hold you, the veil tore before you. You silenced the voice of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, the breath of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival, you have no equal, now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is, what a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. Go tell somebody about Jesus this week and how powerful it is, and that he offers hope and salvation through the cross, and it could be theirs. That God has made a way, and his name is Jesus Christ. Amen. God bless you. See you next week. Bring a chair.